after the attacks that there have been on Iran's various proxy groups, especially since the Gaza conflict, how much of a threat is still posed by those groups in your judgment?
First of all, I think it's very important to say that the only Iranian client who's been hit in an irreversible way as a result of the events of the last 21 months is the Assad regime in Syria, which of course has gone and is almost certainly not coming back. As I say, Alawi rule in Syria was in many ways always an anomaly. That has now gone and it's not coming back. All the other proxies and clients of Iran, namely Lebanese Hezbollah, the Iraqi Shia militias of the Hashd al-Sha'bi, and I think not least the Ansar Allah or Houthis movement in Yemen, have suffered blows, have been hit, but have not been destroyed. So I think much depends now on what happens now, on the continuation, if necessary, to enforce their continued weakness on the part of Israel and its allies. If nothing is done, and if Iran succeeds in creating political conditions whereby nothing will be done, then it's safe to assume that within, a half decade or so, these movements could well be back to where they were, just 2 years ago.
Okay, they've been weakened then, but not destroyed.
Exactly.
What is their continuing capability of doing harm, of launching attacks?
Well, first of all, with regard to, to some degree, each one is a case unto itself.
Indeed.
If we take Lebanese Hezbollah as an example, this is a movement, an organisation which has been very, very seriously weakened, and this is well known. The historic leadership of the movement has been wiped out. Its mid-level cadres have been hit very hard indeed by the Israeli intelligence-led operations that focused on Hezbollah communications equipment, as people are very familiar with. The Israeli ground manoeuvre, also less spoken about, on the border, just north of the border, has decimated the movement's infrastructure just north of the border. Its long-range missile capacity has been very hard hit. So Lebanese Hezbollah has been set back very, very seriously. It will take it a very, very long time to recover, if it recovers, and it's in no state now really to pose any danger whatsoever to Israel, which is why you see the case of Israel and the Israeli Air Force basically having freedom of maneuver over Lebanese skies right now to hit at Hezbollah targets according to their will. But other aspects or other elements of Iran's proxy array across the region have been lit much less hard. The Iraqi Shia militias were mainly absent from the fight, maybe wisely on their part. As a result, they have not been hit particularly hard by anybody in the course of the last 2 years. The Houthis in Yemen have been hit both by American attacks and by very telling Israeli attacks on the Hodeidah port and the airport at Sana'a. So very serious infrastructural damage. But at the same time, the Yemeni Houthis are not necessarily all that concerned about their infrastructure. They're still in business, as we saw in recent days. They're still hitting ships on the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden route. So yes, they're damaged, but they're still very much in business. So it does depend very much on organisation to organisation.
Right, so a word more on the Houthis, because as you say, they've been attacking shipping just in recent days. They've attacked Greek shipping, Liberian-flagged Greek-operated vessels. They've got this ceasefire with the United States. What does that mean, given they're still carrying out offensive operations?
Well, they said at the time that it was that the ceasefire was only concerned with American shipping. What they claim, perhaps with some truth, one needs to look into it, is that the companies of the two ships which were hit in recent days had at certain times dealt or docked in Israel over the last 6 months. So as far as the Houthis are concerned, these are ships which are doing business with Israel, and therefore, in terms of their, to be fair to them, so to speak, in terms of their originally stated parameters of the ceasefire, as far as they're concerned, these ships are fair game. Now, it's a fact that for a number of months following the ceasefire between the Houthis and the United States, they did not hit at any shipping in the Gulf of Aden Red Sea route. They have now, as of 3 or 4 days ago, started again. And the big question, I think, on everybody's mind is this the beginning now of a renewed campaign by the Houthis ongoing against shipping on that vital maritime route?
And we can reasonably expect them to be a target again for Israeli attack.
I think it's almost certain that they will be, and I think understandably so. They, of course, are still firing at Israel. Not only the issue of firing at shipping, but they're seeking to fire and are firing ballistic missiles at Israel, which, of course, for the most part, throughout the campaign, actually have been intercepted. A couple of exceptions, but for the most part, Israel brings those missiles down.
Okay, we talk about these groups as if they're almost Iranian possessions, but they are, in their own right, they are fanatical groups capable of considerable harm. They mean nothing but harm to Israel, and they have enormous animus towards the West. So how much control does Iran have?
Yeah, I think that's in a way the million-dollar question, because I think to some degree prior to the current war, the one that's been going on since October 7th, 2023, it was widely believed both by analysts and opponents of the Iranian regime, and indeed proposed by the Iranian regime itself, that this was a very tightly connected bloc in which the Iranians really did have these assets or allies or proxies, and they would work in tandem and in concert with one another. I think what we've seen in the course of the last 21 months is that the situation is much more complex than that, and that actually these organizations, while some of them, such as Lebanese Hezbollah or Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, are in fact creations of the Iranian regime, and others like the Houthis and Hamas are clients and beneficiaries of the Iranian regime. Nevertheless, when it comes down to it, it appears they are in fact both Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza and the Houthis local actors with their own local interests and their own local preferences, such that they do not necessarily, as we've now seen, sort of jump to attention and act like, a battalion of light infantry belonging to the Iranian army that just gets an order and obeys orders. No, it's far more complex than that. Each of these organizations appears to have their own interests, their own preferences, and therefore they aren't necessarily available for mobilization whenever Iran might want them to be mobilized.
Right. Now, just a bit more on Syria, because you've been to Syria, you were there under Assad,
yes.
You've been there under the new regime. What's your judgment on whether Syria, anytime soon, might move closer to forming links with the international community in general and with Israel in particular, some sort of accord, or is that beyond
I would say
reasonable expectation?
I mean, I do think that the kind of talk which suggests that Syria under Ahmed Shara's new government may be imminently moving towards recognition of Israel and membership in the Abraham Accords is a little bit far-fetched. I mean, frankly, it's very hard for me to see any Syrian government of any kind ceding the claim to the Golan Heights, and it's entirely impossible for me to imagine any Israeli government ceding the Golan Heights to Syria. So, sort of all-encompassing recognition, full recognition, I think is very, very unlikely. Having said that, we're hearing that contacts are ongoing between the two governments under the auspices, some say of Turkey, some speak of other players. There is talk or even the possibility of Netanyahu and Shara meeting at the next UN General Assembly. So, clearly something is going on in terms of contacts. It's not impossible for me to imagine some kind of non-aggression pact, it's some kind of agreement for a kind of long-term ceasefire along the border from between Israel and Syria. And that certainly would be a very, very major gain. But I think much does still depend, and I would caveat it in this regard, much does still depend on the possibility of Ahmed Shara achieving stability within Syria itself. And we just saw in the last 24 hours, we're hearing from one source at least up to maybe 100 people killed in fighting between Druze armed people in Sueda province in the south and people representing the new regime. So there's a long way to go, actually, I think, before Shara fully consolidates his own rule in Syria. And only then, I think, can we seriously talk about these kind of diplomatic moves.
Right. Now, lastly, on Gaza, the conflict goes on. We're still seeing Israeli attacks on targets in Gaza. And meanwhile, again and again, we find ourselves talking about the Israeli defense minister's plan to concentrate Palestinians in an area, a secured area on the ruins of Rafah.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
My sense is that with regard to Gaza, of course, there's ongoing talks in Doha about a possible ceasefire. My sense is that a short-term 60-day ceasefire is not unimaginable, and certainly I hope that is achieved in the coming days or weeks. The idea of a long-term ceasefire and agreement, however, I think stumbles on the basic fact of the contradictory objectives of the two sides. Netanyahu appears determined to end the Hamas military presence and end the Hamas regime in Gaza, and Hamas appears not to be in a position where it feels the necessity of surrendering any of that. It wants to come out of this, nevertheless, surviving as an organisation in the Strip with a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. So at the end of the day, the two sides still have contradictory wills. Both sides still think there's what to prosecute in terms of pushing that will, and therefore I think a long-term ceasefire is still quite some way away.
And the idea of driving Palestinians in Gaza into this particular area, not allowing them to leave unless they're leaving for another country, is that a practical possibility? I mean,
my sense, at least from what I've been reading in the last days, is that the Israel Defense Forces itself and the chief of staff there is sceptical about this and is expressing his own concerns about the practicability of it. I mean, we've heard statements made by Defense Minister Israel Katz in recent days about this. I think we're still some way away from this being a fully thought out plan. That's my sense, at least.
Jonathan, good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.